He didn't say much, wore a flannel shirt, work pants, and pushed a mop bucket across the gym floor like he'd been doing it forever. His movements were methodical, unremarkable. The young Special Forces candidates thought he was just another aging janitor cleaning up after their late-night training sessions, until one of them noticed the way the old man moved. Not the mopping, the way he pivoted, the way his weight shifted, the way his hands positioned themselves on the mop handle like someone who'd spent decades gripping something entirely different. And when the arrogant MMA fighter challenged him to demonstrate a technique, the entire gym went silent. Because what happened next wasn't a fight, it was a lesson. And the old janitor with scarred knuckles and tired eyes reminded everyone that some skills don't fade with age. They just wait quietly until someone's foolish enough to test them. Welcome to Secrets Never Told. Before we begin this story of humility, mastery, and the moment when a dismissed janitor showed a room full of warriors, what real combat looks like, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you believe that respect must be earned, not demanded, hit that subscribe button and help us share these stories. The Fort Campbell base gym closed to general personnel at 10 p.m., but the combatives area stayed open for Special Forces candidates doing late-night training. That's when Richard Sullivan showed up, not to train, to clean. He was 65 years old, wore a faded flannel shirt tucked into work pants, and pushed a yellow mop bucket with the slow, steady rhythm of a man who'd been doing this job for years. His name tag said Rick in simple block letters. No rank, no story. Just another maintenance worker invisible to the young soldiers who used the facility. The regulars barely noticed him. They were too focused on their own training, grappling on the mats, hitting heavy bags, drilling submissions and ground techniques. Special Forces candidates preparing for the Q course, where hand-to-hand combat could mean the difference between mission success and body bag. They were young, strong, confident. Rick was old, quiet, forgettable, except he wasn't. Marcus Rivera noticed him first, not because Rick did anything remarkable, but because Marcus had been training at this gym for 3 months, and the old janitor was always there. Same time, same mop bucket, same quiet efficiency, same invisible presence that most people looked right through. Marcus was 26, a Special Forces candidate with an 18 Bravo MOS, Weapons Sergeant track. But before the Army, he'd fought amateur MMA. 3 years, 12 fights, 9 wins, 2 losses, 1 draw. He knew how fighters moved, knew how trained bodies carried themselves differently than civilians, the way weight distributed, the way joints aligned, the unconscious positioning that came from years of drilling movement patterns until they became involuntary. And something about the way Rick mopped bothered him. Had bothered him for weeks now. It was subtle. Most people wouldn't notice. But Marcus watched people's bodies the way some men watched faces. It was part of his fighter's brain. Always assessing, always looking for tells, always measuring threats even when there weren't any. The way Rick's feet positioned when he pushed the bucket wasn't random. His lead foot pointed forward, back foot at 45 degrees. His stance was shoulder width, knees slightly bent. That was a fighting stance, or close to it. The way Rick's hips rotated when he wrung out the mop, that wasn't just efficiency, that was kinetic chain rotation, using core muscles to generate power. The kind of movement boxers drilled for thousands of reps. The way his shoulders stayed square and level when he bent to pick things up. The way his center of gravity stayed low and balanced. The way he moved around obstacles, not looking directly at them, but somehow always aware, his body adjusting and flowing without conscious thought. These weren't the movements of a janitor who'd spent his life pushing mops. These were the mechanics of someone who'd spent years, maybe decades, training body awareness at a level most men never reached. Someone who'd drilled movement patterns until they were hardwired into the nervous system. Someone for whom violence had once been a daily possibility, and whose body still remembered, even if his life no longer required it. That night, Marcus was drilling arm drags with his training partner Jackson on the mat near the heavy bags. It was late, almost midnight. The gym was nearly empty, just them, 2 other guys doing cardio, and Rick methodically mopping the floor along the far wall. Marcus watched him between rounds, watched the way Rick moved around obstacles without looking at them, watched the way his hands gripped the mop handle, high and firm, like someone who'd gripped throats and rifle stocks, and probably worse. "Yo, you see that old dude?" Marcus muttered to Jackson during a water break. Jackson glanced over. "The janitor? What about him? Watch how he moves." Jackson watched, shrugged. "He's mopping, bro." "Nah, look at his footwork. Look at his base." Jackson looked again, paused. "Huh, that's weird. He moves like, I don't know, like he's done this before." "Done what?" "Fighting, grappling, something." Marcus nodded slowly. He'd been thinking the same thing, but that was crazy, right? The guy was 65, a janitor, probably retired maintenance, pension, just trying to stay busy. Except Except those scars on his knuckles, Marcus had noticed them a week ago when Rick was emptying trash cans near the cage. Old scars, not from accidents, from impact. Repeated impact over years. Marcus stood up. I'm gonna ask him. Ask him what? If he trains. Jackson laughed. Dude, he's like 70. Leave the old man alone. But Marcus was already walking over. He had that fighter's arrogance, the kind that comes from being young, strong, and convinced you've seen it all. He approached Rick, who was wringing out his mop into the bucket. Excuse me, sir. You train? Rick looked up. His eyes were gray, tired, and completely calm. Train what? Combat. Fighting. I've been watching you move. You've got, I don't know, footwork, body mechanics. Rick gave a small, sad smile. I mop floors. Yeah, but before that, you ever do martial arts? Boxing? Anything? Rick wrung out the mop again, slower this time. Long time ago. What style? Army style. Marcus grinned. You were a grunt? Infantry? Something like that. What unit? Rick paused, looked at Marcus like he was deciding whether to answer. Then he just said, doesn't matter anymore. That was a different life. Marcus should have left it alone, should have nodded, walked away, let the old man finish his work. But he was 26 and cocky and convinced that his 3 years of amateur MMA made him qualified to judge everyone's skills. So instead, he pushed. You ever spar anymore? Rick shook his head. No. Why not? Because I'm 65 and I clean floors for a living. But you remember how, right? The techniques? Rick looked at him for a long moment. Some things you don't forget. Could you show me something? Just a demo. I'm always trying to learn. I don't think that's a good idea. Why not? Because you're not asking to learn. You're asking to see if the old man can still move. And I'm telling you, I can't. Not like I used to. Marcus felt his ego flare. I'm not trying to disrespect you, man. I just... Then don't, Rick said quietly. Respect means letting people be who they are now, not who they used to be. He picked up his mop bucket and walked toward the supply closet. Marcus stood there, feeling dismissed, embarrassed. Jackson was watching from across the gym, shaking his head. But Marcus wasn't done. He followed Rick to the closet. One technique, Marcus said. Just show me one thing, please. Rick set the bucket down, turned around. His eyes weren't angry, just tired. Why? Because I want to know if you're as good as your footwork says you are. Rick studied him. And if I'm not, you'll laugh. Tell your friends the old janitor thought he was tough. No, I do. Yes, you would. Because that's what young men do. They test everyone. They need to know where they stand. And the only way they know how to find out is by challenging. Rick sighed. All right, one technique, then you leave me alone and let me finish my work. Marcus nodded eagerly. Yeah, absolutely. Rick walked back to the mat area. Marcus followed. Jackson and the two other guys noticed and stopped their workouts. Curious now, Rick stood in the center of the mat, looking completely out of place in his flannel and work pants. Marcus took off his shirt, habit from MMA training, and bounced on his toes. So what do you want to see? Marcus asked. Submission? Takedown? Come at me, Rick said simply. What? However you want. Full speed. Don't hold back. Marcus hesitated. Dude, I don't want to hurt you. Rick's expression didn't change. You won't. That stung Marcus's ego just enough. The dismissive certainty in Rick's voice. The way he stood there in work pants and a flannel shirt like he was about to demonstrate how to mop, not how to fight. Marcus felt his competitive instinct kick in. The same instinct that had won him 9 amateur MMA fights. He wanted to prove himself, to show this old janitor that youth and training still mattered. All right, Marcus said, rolling his shoulders. Don't say I didn't warn you. He stepped forward and shot a double-leg takedown. Proper technique, explosive entry, the kind that had put opponents on their backs in amateur competition. He was fast. He was strong. He drove forward with his legs, arms reaching for Rick's thighs, head positioned properly to avoid counters. Everything by the book. He never got close. Rick's body shifted maybe 6 inches, that was all. Just a subtle angle change, his hips rotating away from the shot while his weight dropped and centered. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't flashy, but it made Marcus's explosive forward momentum suddenly have nothing to grab onto. Marcus's hands found air where Rick's legs should have been, and then Rick's hands were on him. The old man's left hand came down on Marcus's head, not striking, just guiding, using Marcus's own forward momentum to push his head down and to the side. His right hand checked Marcus's shoulder, controlling the angle. Marcus felt his balance disappear, felt his body being redirected like water flowing around a rock. He tried to adjust, to recover his base, but Rick was already 2 steps ahead. Rick's knee came up, not to strike, just to position, and suddenly Marcus was face down on the mat with Rick's weight pressing on his back, his right arm trapped and extended in a joint lock that was positioned perfectly to hyperextend his elbow. Rick held him there, pressure applied with surgical precision, not hurting him, not trying to injure, just demonstrating complete control with minimal effort. The entire sequence had taken maybe 2 seconds. Marcus's face was pressed against the mat, his arm locked, his body completely immobilized by a 65-year-old janitor who wasn't even breathing hard. Rick held the position and spoke quietly, his voice calm and instructional. This is called an overhook control to gift wrap to Kimura. It's basic. Every white belt knows the technique, but knowing it and applying it against resistance are different things. You committed too hard to your shot. No setup, no feint, no level change to disguise your intent, just explosive forward. Against another striker, that might work. Against someone who understands grappling and has been teaching it for 30 years, you gave up your posture, your balance, and your arm. The moment you shot without setting it up, you told me exactly what you were going to do and gave me 3 different ways to counter it. He released the lock and stood up smoothly, offering his hand. Marcus took it, his face burning with embarrassment. He looked around. Jackson and the 2 other guys were staring, mouths slightly open. The gym had gone completely silent except for the hum of the ventilation system. Marcus stood up, breathing hard, not from exertion, but from the shock of being completely dominated in 2 seconds by someone old enough to be his grandfather. I've never felt anything like that. The way you moved, it was like you knew what I was going to do before I did it. I did know, Rick said simply, because you showed me. Your weight shifted to your front foot half a second before you shot. Your eyes focused on my hips. Your hands came forward slightly. Your body told me everything. The shot itself was just confirmation. Where did you learn to read people like that? Practice. Thousands of reps with people trying to hurt me. After a while, you stop seeing techniques and start seeing intentions. That's one technique, Rick said. Now I need to finish mopping. Marcus stood there, breathing hard, not from exertion, but from shock. Who are you? Rick picked up his mop bucket. I'm the janitor. No, I mean, where did you learn that? Army. What part of the Army teaches that? Rick paused at the edge of the mat, looked back. His eyes held something Marcus couldn't quite read. Not pride, not anger, just memory. The part that doesn't exist on paper. And then he walked away, leaving Marcus standing on the mat with a bruised ego and 1,000 questions. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in his barracks bunk staring at the ceiling, replaying those 2 seconds over and over. The way Rick had moved, not fast, not explosive, just efficient. Like watching a chess master make a move that looked simple until you realized it was 3 steps ahead of anything you'd anticipated. The embarrassment was bad enough, but what bothered Marcus more was the certainty in Rick's movements, the absolute confidence that came from having done something so many times that it was beyond conscious thought, pure muscle memory refined over decades. Around 2 a.m., Marcus gave up on sleep. He climbed out of his bunk quietly, grabbed his laptop, and went to the common area, booted it up, and started searching. Army hand-to-hand combat instructors, special operations combatives, Delta Force training cadre. He went down rabbit holes, reading about SFODD selection processes, about the specialized training they received, about the cadre of instructors who'd spent careers teaching the most elite warriors in the world how to survive close-quarters combat. Most of the information was generic, public affairs garbage, but he kept digging, found old forum posts from soldiers who'd been through training at Fort Bragg in the 1990s. One thread caught his attention. Who was the scariest instructor you ever had? The responses were what you'd expect. Drill sergeants who made grown men cry. Ranger instructors who could smell weakness. But one reply stood out. If you did hand-to-hand at Bragg between 85 and 2003, you probably met Sullivan. Never raised his voice, never showed off. But he'd put you on your ass so fast you'd think you tripped. Dude was a ghost. You'd be drilling a technique wrong and he'd just appear next to you, make one tiny adjustment, and suddenly the technique worked perfectly. Heard he retired and disappeared. Legend. Marcus stared at that name. Sullivan. He searched it. MSG Richard Sullivan, SFODD. Found fragments. A citation for a Bronze Star from Somalia, 1993. Master Sergeant Richard J. Sullivan distinguished himself by heroic achievement while engaged in combat operations. The details were redacted. Another mention in a declassified document about training modifications to the Army Combatives Program in 1997. Sullivan listed as a technical consultant. Then he found it. A scanned PDF of the old FM 21150, the Army Combatives Field Manual from before they modernized everything into the MACP system. He flipped to the front matter, looking at the development credits. And there, in small print, under technical consultation provided by MSG Richard J. Sullivan, SFODD, Fort Bragg. Marcus sat back. The janitor mopping floors at midnight had literally written the book on how the Army taught soldiers to fight with their hands. He'd spent 20 years at Delta Force teaching operators, men who would go on to hunt terrorists in a dozen countries, how to kill silently, how to control prisoners, how to survive when everything went wrong and all you had were your hands and your training. And now he pushed a mop bucket for probably minimum wage age because the Army decided he'd aged out and there was no place for a 65-year-old combatives instructor in a military that worshipped youth and technology. Marcus looked at his phone. 2:47 a.m. He sent a text to Jackson. "Tomorrow night, we're going to the gym early, before he starts cleaning." The next night, Marcus and Jackson arrived at the gym at 10:30 p.m., right when Rick was starting his shift. They watched him sign in at the front desk, grab his equipment, and start his routine. But this time, when Rick began mopping near the mat area, Marcus approached different this time. Respectful, humble. "Sir, can I talk to you?" Rick looked up, recognized him, sighed. "I thought we were done." "We are, I'm not here to challenge you. I'm here to apologize." Rick raised an eyebrow. "I was an asshole last night," Marcus said. "I disrespected you. I treated you like you had to prove something to me. And after you left, I looked you up." Rick's expression didn't change. And I found out that you wrote the book literally. You're in the FM 21-150 contributor list. You taught at Bragg. You were Delta Force for 20 years. Was, past tense. But you're still, you still have it. What you showed me last night was basic technique executed against an overconfident opponent. Nothing special. It felt pretty special from the mat. Rick allowed himself a small smile. "You left yourself open. I just took advantage." Marcus hesitated. "Then, would you teach me?" "Not for free. I'll pay you. Whatever you want, I don't want to make the same mistake again. The mistake of thinking I know everything when I clearly don't." Rick studied him for a long moment. "You're Special Forces candidate?" "Yes, sir." "What's your MOS?" 18 Bravo, Weapons Sergeant. "You'll learn combatives in the Q course." "I know, but I want to learn from someone who actually did it, not just someone who teaches out of a manual." Rick set down his mop. "What's your name?" "Marcus Rivera." "Where are you from, Marcus?" "San Antonio." "Why'd you join Special Forces?" Marcus thought about it. "Because I wanted to be the best. I wanted to prove something." "To who?" "To everyone. To myself." Rick nodded slowly. "That's the wrong reason, but it's honest." He picked up his mop again. "I don't teach anymore. I'm retired. This is my job now." "But, however," Rick interrupted, "if you want to train on your own, and you want someone to watch and occasionally correct your form, I suppose I could do that during my breaks. Unpaid. Because teaching is what I did for 20 years, and old habits die hard." Marcus's face lit up. "Seriously? One condition. You don't tell anyone who I am. You don't spread it around. I'm just the janitor who knows some techniques. That's it." "Why?" "Because I left that life for a reason. And I don't need young warriors treating me like some guru who has all the answers. I just know how to break joints and stop men from breathing. That's not wisdom. That's just training." Marcus nodded. "Deal." And that's how it started. Over the next 3 months, Marcus and eventually Jackson and a few others would train late at the gym while Rick cleaned. And during his breaks, Rick would watch occasionally. He'd step onto the mat and make a small correction, a grip adjustment, a foot position, a timing note. He never demonstrated full techniques anymore. Never sparred, just coached quietly. The way he'd done for 20 years before the Army decided he was too old and pushed him toward retirement. The young SF candidates started calling him Coach, even though he insisted he wasn't. They started showing up earlier, training harder, because they knew the old janitor watching from the corner had forgotten more about combat than most of them would ever learn. One night, Marcus asked him the question that had been bothering him. "Sir, why do you still work here? You could be teaching officially, running a school, making real money." Rick was mopping near the cage. He stopped, leaned on the mop handle. "Because when you do something at the highest level for long enough, it becomes who you are. And when they tell you you're done, you don't just walk away clean. You carry it. Every day, every movement, every time you see young men training, you remember what it felt like to be that sharp, that dangerous, that alive." He wrung out the mop. "This job lets me stay close to it without pretending I'm still that man. I'm not. But I can still help, in small ways." From the corner, Marcus didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and got back to work. 3 months later, Marcus graduated the Q course, made it through selection, made it through training, earned the Green Beret. On his last night at Fort Campbell before shipping out to his ODA, he went to the gym, found Rick mopping, walked over and stood at attention. "Sir, I wanted to thank you for everything you taught me." Rick looked up, smiled. "I didn't teach you much. You taught me to respect what I don't understand, to ask before assuming, to recognize that the people who've done the real work are often the ones who talk the least about it." Rick extended his hand. Marcus shook it, and that's when he felt it. Something pressed into his palm. He looked down. It was an old challenge coin, worn, faded. The Delta Force insignia on one side, on the other, 4 words: "Quiet professionals, still here." "You earned that," Rick said. "Not because you got good at fighting, but because you learned to be humble. That's harder." Marcus tried to hand it back. "Sir, I can't." "You can, and you will, because someday you'll be the old guy in the corner, and some young warrior will challenge you without knowing who you are. And when that happens, you'll remember that respect isn't taken. It's given, and it's earned through silence, not volume." Marcus left that night night with the coin in his pocket, and a lesson he'd carry for the rest of his life. 6 months later, Marcus was deployed. A year after that, he heard through the grapevine that Rick had passed away. Heart attack, quiet. At home, the gym held a small memorial. They retired the corner mat where Rick used to watch, put up a small plaque, Coach's Corner, reserved for those who lead from the shadows. None of the young soldiers knew his full story. They knew he'd been Army. They knew he'd taught combatives, but they didn't know about the 20 years in Delta Force, the hundreds of operators he'd trained, the missions he'd supported, the lives he'd saved by teaching men how to survive close quarters combat. Because Rick never told them, he just mopped floors and quietly corrected their form and reminded them that real warriors don't need an audience. Have you ever met someone like Rick? Someone who'd done extraordinary things but lived an ordinary life? Someone who taught through action instead of words? Share their name in the comments. Let others know their story. Because at Secrets Never Told, we believe that the most powerful teachers are the ones who never ask for recognition. They just show up, do the work, and leave the world a little better than they found it. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, subscribe, share, and help us keep these voices alive. We'll see you in the next one. And until then, if you ever see an old janitor watching from the corner of the gym, pay attention. You might be in the presence of a master.